Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. I am Citizen Strife, and this week we are going to continue venturing into the world of Remnant and talk about RWBY Volumes 4 and 5. Now, at the end of Volume 3, Beacon had fallen, Pyrrha is dead, and the main party was split. And as far as plot threads go, it is really about the characters splitting up. It is about what they do now that Salem has revealed herself as the main threat, dealing with all of the fallout from the fall of Beacon and going their own ways. So RWBY joins Nora, Jean, and Lyran to form Team Ranger, and they're going to Mistral. Unbeknownst to them, they know Crow is following behind, but eventually Crow just joins them anyway. Weiss is taken back to Atlas and Mantle by force and is basically grounded, for lack of a better term. So she has to deal with going back to her family. As was mentioned in the first few seasons, Weiss's family life is not great. Blake is on a journey back home with someone in tow she wasn't expecting. Sun decided to just follow along. So there's an in-story reason why Yang is pissed that Blake isn't with them, but Blake decided to leave before everybody else did, and before they split up. As far as Yang goes, she's the one who took it kind of the hardest. And she lost her arm and she was at home. And she is recuperating in this season. So think of Season 4, Volume 4 as a slowdown. Much like Castlevania Season 3 was for Netflix. There is fighting and there is stuff going on, but it's more meat on the bones and stuff in the background setting up Volume 5, which is where things really amp up in this part of the arc. But we have all of the things in place. We have all the characters doing their own thing in their own way. And this is where I said before that the characters are still who they are because of their backstories, but this is where they start to flesh out who they are as people and as huntresses and huntsmen. Everybody has their own way of dealing with the fall of Beacon, and everybody has their own motivations now. But at the same time, this is where the fun and games are over, and the characters themselves aren't the stock one-note people anymore, which does come up as a bit of an aside when they talk to each other. They're still the same people they were, but they don't show as much an affect towards those tropes as they were, and now the characters are more solidarity, even when they're split apart, as we'll see. Because this is that learning curves kind of situation, and everybody goes to their own paces as to what they're dealing with. So, as far as new characters go, a lot of the new characters are both villains and heroes. We'll go into the main heroes of the piece, and these are Gira Belladonna, voiced by Kent Williams, who was, I believe he was father in Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. I know him from stuff like Darker Than Black and Future Diary and whatever. Gira Belladonna is just a gigantic man. A gigantic faunus with a gigantic voice. And he does not need a semblance because he is the gigantic man who can rip people to shreds and throw them against the wall. Being Blake's father, you kind of know what you're in for, but there's also that ingrained sense that he's a much nicer person than he lets on, and he's stern, but he's also unsure of himself, which comes across with Blake because Blake left, and she's unsure of the situation, and she doesn't really know how to handle talking to him again. He doesn't know how to talk to her. So it's been, 2-3 some years since they met, since they last saw each other, and things have definitely changed. But Gira, as a former leader of the White Fang, is very supportive and is basically the leader of Menagerie. When Sun finds out, he's like, dude, you own this house? You own this city? It's like, technically they do, but they don't, they don't foist it on people. But they do have a leadership authority. Kali Belladonna is voiced by Tara Platt, who was Mitsuru and Elizabeth in Persona 3. Her ever-loving Persona. Anyway, she doesn't get a whole bunch of stuff to do. She's not as much an integral figure as Gira is, but again, she is the mother figure. She is the... I mean, they're both nice people, but Kali tends to just be the, obviously the mother figure. The one poking the bear and saying, I like Sun. Gira's going, I really don't like you. That sort of meet the parents kind of vibe. And Kali doesn't really do much, but they have to deal with the White Fang, so she's able to, like, handle herself in a fight when necessary. But, they're there as Blake's parents, and they are very suited for such roles. Oscar Pine is voiced by Aaron Dismuke, and I talked about Fullmetal Alchemist before. He was Alphonse Elric in the original 03 version. And what caught me off guard going way back is that he was like 10 years old or something when he did that role. So now he's like 30, and it's like, you still hear that Alphonse Elric in him, and even though he's older, it's kind of like Bryce Papenbrook when he started when he was young, and now he's like Kirito and shit. You can still tell it's them after 20 years, and it's just like, their voices have not changed. But Oscar's whole thing is he's a farm boy, at least until Ozpin shows up. And Oscar is a big part of this show because while I'm not going to give it away because it's mentioned more in Volume 6, the original Ozpin is now reincarnated inside Oscar. So they're basically two souls sharing the same body. And there is that will he, won't they fight kind of thing going on because Oscar doesn't know how to fight. And Ozpin has been fighting for nigh on who knows how fucking long. So Ozpin knows what's going on. Oscar doesn't. And in Season 4, his whole drive is, well, I need to get to Mistral because this guy in my head told me to. And let's face facts, Oscar and Ozpin are going to be linchpins of the story going forward, so it makes sense that they put a lot of effort into defining who Oscar is. Taiyang Zhaolong, voiced by Bernie Burns, is Yang and Ruby and Yang's dad. Former instructor at Signal. It's not mentioned a lot, I don't think, that he was a former... I mean, it's mentioned that he's a former huntsman in New Crow and others, but he's kind of in the background a lot. And his role in this season is to help Yang. Because Ruby, was hurt in the end of Season 4, or Season 3, but she left already. So Tai is kind of left bringing Yang back to reality in a way. And again, he's been through what she's been through. Not to the severe extent that she lost an arm, but, he understands that Yang as a person is not going to just give up. But she's in this weird, like, just uncertain time where she's just, like, Season 4 is all about her, like, having lost an arm, and they show sequences of her, like, grabbing the mail with one arm, and, it's such a thing. It's like disability. Like, how do you even fathom that? How do you even work around that? So Tai's whole thing is protecting Yang until she's ready to go back out on the road. And he trains her to think about fighting without using a semblance, or at least thinking through a fight before using it again and being more resourceful. And that's because he doesn't really have a semblance, or at least it's not shown off in this. But he's such a good martial artist that he is able to just, like, hold his own against these crazy forces that, would threaten him and Crow and the others. So it's not known if he has a semblance or whatnot, but again, even if he does, I'm sure he would show it someday. But now we get to the villains, and because Cinder has been not taken care of, but indisposed in a way, but she's alluded to Salem. And Salem was the narrator for season 1 through 3, and then showed up at the end of volume 3, and is a ever-present threat from here on out. From every volume going from 4 onward, Salem is the big bad. She's voiced by Jen Taylor, and her power is creating Grimm. She is the creator of Grimm. She can basically like spy on people by using this like orb of Grimm that has like weird spikes on it and shit. She basically has untold magical powers that in these volumes they don't manifest, but they sure as fuck do. Every volume after 4 is just, what does Salem do? What is she here for? And how much more powerful can she possibly be? Let's face facts. The fact that the maidens exist doesn't bother her at all. What bothers her is the relics that she's looking to find. But she is so confident in her abilities that, well, she could do a fight all on her own, I suppose. But she is so devious and so destructive that she's willing to have other people do her work for her. Case in point, Tyrion Callows, voiced by Josh Grell, another Funimation gold standard. He has a semblance that's different. The idea is that he's able to kind of disrupt people's auras and stop their semblances at will. Not a whole bunch, but it's kind of a here and there sort of vibe that he does, because his whole thing is he has like weapons on his hands and feet, and then he has a tail attachment, and his whole thing is he is Salem's #1 assassin. Think Mercury, but even more dangerous and more psychotic, if you can believe that. I like, he's the guy who is the devious, I'm going to kill you kind of person, and revel in it. But he's also scared of Salem, because Salem can just nope him out of existence if she wants. But he's useful because he has no qualms about ripping people to shreds at all. He has no moral compass at all. You kind of need that sort of thing when he's there for Salem, because he just wants to kill things. You need villains like that, I suppose. And he does it well. On their side is Arthur Watts, voiced by Chris Sabat. I forget which character he did in Dragon Ball Z. Forgive me, I've never watched Dragon Ball Z. I know that sounds crazy, but whatever. He was one of the main voice actors for that, and probably has been since it started. But I know him from God knows every other Funimation thing in existence. Even more so that he's one of their head writers and head ADR guys now after 20 years. But Arthur Watts doesn't really have a semblance. He has a weapon that shows up later, not really in this volume, but it's kind of like he uses a revolver and kind of like weird like glyph shield things like Weiss kind of does. His whole thing is he's a doctor and an engineer and a scientist, so he does all the techie stuff. If Tyrion does all the heavy legwork and killing dudes, then Arthur is the one that gets past all those locks. So Tyrion kills all the humans, Arthur kills all the machines, or makes them do his bidding or whatever. That's that sort of thing. He is a hacker by trade, and very useful in that regard. And he's got a better grasp of a silver tongue than someone like a Cinder or a Tyrion, because he's able to at least come off as a charismatic figure who isn't going to kill you every 5 seconds, but he is a threat. He is Salem's, I'm going to give you a choice, but that choice is going to benefit us whether you like it or not. And rounding out the main bad guys going forward is Hazel Reinhardt. William Orendorff, his semblance doesn't really show up until the very end of Volume 5. But it is an interesting one. He doesn't use weapons, and he doesn't have to. He is able to block out all sensations of pain until his body can no longer stand it, because he just flat out injects himself with dust. He just pokes his body like a fucking drug and says, I will fight you. And he is just ridiculously powerful. Unlike Arthur and Tyrion, he does have a bit of a moral compass. He's got his own reason for doing a thing, and it revolves around Ozpin that gets revealed in Volume 5. He's joining Salem out of vengeance, but not in the same way that, say, Arthur or Adam Taurus or whatever, just endless vigilantism. Hazel at least has like a measured head on the whole thing, but he knows that he's on what he would consider the right side, and he will use his powers for evil because he has a justifiable reason to do so, and it has to do with Ozpin. And when he gets mad, it makes even Nora and Yang look like fucking children. We've got members of the White Fang. Again, we are kind of bouncing around, but that's what they're doing. When you have so many different side stories, you have so many different characters. You have Corsac and Fennec Albane, voiced by Derek Mears and Mike McFarlane. Their whole thing is they're Adam Taurus's right-hand men, and they have these like small fire and wind weapons that kind of shoot projectiles and elemental stuff. They don't really have semblances. They're kind of like a weaker version of Adam, pretty much. They are the Arthur Watts', scheming mamby-pamby dudes, because Adam is the strong type. But they're sent to Menagerie, which is where Blake is going, to fuck with things and fuck up Blake's family. They get in league with Ilya Amatola, who's voiced by Jeremy Lee, Makoto from Persona 5. You see where I'm starting to like love the show more and more when I'm talking about this cast list, because it's just Persona actors or Full Metal Alchemist actors all the fucking time. But yeah, you got Jeremy Lee doing Ilya, who's her semblance is camouflage. She is a stealthy character, but she's able to fight for herself with like this weird like lightning whip kind of thing. She's actually able to take Sun down with like a lightning whip attack, and it's pretty neat. Again, she's kind of caught in the middle. She's not expressly evil, but she's kind of like Hazel is, where she's on the side of what she thinks is right, and she has a good reason for thinking so. But you also know that because she's Blake's best friend in a way, or at least best friend from the White Fang, it's like she's caught in the middle of a weird situation, and it manifests for these volumes. And again, it's played really well, as you can tell. I mean, it's Jeremy Lee. I'm not going to say no to any character that she's voicing. So there we go. And this is like volume 1, where it's just so many characters I have to get through. But again, bear with it. It's really good. On the complete opposite outside of things, but kind of in Yang's storyline and Weiss's, sort of, is Raven Branwen, voiced by Anna Hullum. She has a semblance known as teleportation, but it doesn't work she can't just teleport where she wants to. What she does is she has like specific people that she attunes to, and she can teleport to that location. So it's not some nigh invincible, amazing, like I can teleport at will like a Nightcrawler can, but she can teleport across the world if that's where Crow is or whomever is and all that stuff. And she also has an elemental sword. She's more straight-laced like Adam Taurus is. So think of her like Adam Taurus, just flinging a sword around, but she's able to change it around a little bit like Weiss does. but she is way more aggressive with that. Her whole thing is she is very good at her job. Her mentality is she is a bandit. She left Yang and Ruby and whatever, and just, well, I think where it happened was Ty and Raven got together, and they had Yang, and like 5 or 6 years later, they left. Like, she just ran off. She learned things about Salem that Crow knows, but hasn't told them. That Ty knows, but hasn't told them. And Raven's whole thing is she just wants to be left alone. She has the power to do something about it, but she doesn't want to. She doesn't want to get into this fight. But because she is harboring someone known as the Spring Maiden, as we saw with the Fall Maiden situation in Volume 3, she gets the attention of Cinder and everybody else. And it's assumed that Vernal is being harbored as the Spring Maiden. And Vernal uses some good weaponry, ring blades, kind of like Tyrion does. But there's something not quite right about the whole thing. Vernal's voiced by Amber Lee Connors, which is weird because she was Laphicet in Tales of Berseria, but I don't even recognize her at all. She plays a much thicker, darker voice to this, and I'm like, that's a bit of a change. You go from a kid to an adult. Whatever. But Vernal and Raven are kind of outsiders. They're bandits and they do their own thing, and they want to stay the hell away from Salem. They make it very clear they are just there to stay the fuck away. But they are brought into this mess because of circumstance. And regardless of what Crow thinks, or regardless of what Yang or Weiss or whatever think, Raven is just dead set on doing whatever she can to get the fuck out of this situation and stay out of the way. And she can do what Crow can do, and she can turn into a bird and fly, and she uses that to run away most of the time. And it again, she's super powerful. She's on par with someone like Winter, and yet she is just dead set on knowing, I am not getting dragged into this mess, and I don't want you to either. That doesn't work so well, because then we wouldn't have a story, I suppose. Going to Weiss's storyline, we finally get introduced to her family. Oh, goody. Jacques Schnee, again, how do you fucking say that? Jason Douglas, ADV veteran, Funimation veteran, seen him in tons of stuff. So he is the leader of the Schnee Dust Company and married into the family. And Weiss's whole hang-up is that she knows that he married into the family to get money. He didn't give a shit about the family, and he expresses it. He's like those politicians or corporate leaders who just think about money and think about prestige and think about honor and damn the consequences. And is confronted with Weiss having learned the situation about being in a real life or death struggle. Jacques can't really deal with that and has to deal with Ironwood in some situations, and is like, well, Ironwood and my daughter are both fucking with me. How do I stop them? So he has to be kind of that villain in that storyline while Weiss is at home. There's also another one, Weiss's brother Whitley, Howard Wang. Again, no real semblances or weapons in this family. This is just a side story. They're home. They're meant to be home. They're not meant to be, fighters or anything like that. But they just bemean Weiss the whole time. They just trample on her dignity or try to use what they have against her and say, see, you should have listened to us. You shouldn't have gone to Beacon. You should have gone to Atlas like we were supposed to. And, Weiss can't really reconcile that, and they have to deal with, Ironwood being an Atlas again, which kind of sucks, because you have these two, prissy, prancy bitches, trying to tell Weiss what to do, even though she's the one that had a life or death struggle in Beacon. She doesn't show up until later, but Weiss's mother's Willow Schnee. She's pictured in this season. She's voiced by Caitlin Glass when she does show up in season 7 and 8. And as was told from Weiss, knowing that Jacques just married into the family for money and not for love, she kind of went into a downward spiral and started becoming an alcoholic. You know, it's just like, man, yeah, it's just, yeah, you can see where that would be something that they would dig into when they get to it. And then Klein Sieben, he is the only one that like cares about Weiss in this whole season. He is their butler. J. Michael Tatum, Sebastian from Black Butler, the I'm simply one hell of a butler guy. So he has this like weird thing where his eyes will change colors when he's angry or sad or whatever. It's not like a semblance or something. It's just weird. But Klein is the only one of the bunch that is like willing to listen to Weiss and willing to think of her better half. But you have all of these characters kind of coalescing in all of these different things. You have a new set of villains you have to deal with. You have the old guard of villains like Cinder and Emerald and Mercury, kind of like, what am I in for? What am I doing? This is terrible. Like you look at Emerald when she's dealing with Tyrion, and it's like she has this fear of God in her face, and you know they're like, what the fuck did we sign up for? You know, that sort of thing. So the season progresses, and we have these setups of these characters. Once again, Ruby is joining with Jean, Nora, and Ren to do Team Ranger. So their whole thing is they're going through Mistral town by town. They're really seeing a bunch of death and destruction at Salem's hands. But they're going to work to Mistral, and they're going to fight it off. And they happen across several different giant Grimm along the way. And Crow does help them here and there. But they have to deal with Tyrion as well, who is trying to capture Ruby because Salem ordered him to. Oh, dear. What I like about the Ranger storyline is Ren and Nora finally get some backstory, because Ren and Nora are from the continent of Anima. They're not from Mistral per se, but they're from outlying towns, the ones that always get overrun by Grimm. And this is where Ren learns of his semblance known as Tranquility, which is stealth, and he is able to save Nora on multiple occasions, and that's how they met. And that's something that I think the first couple of seasons didn't get into, was Ren and Nora. And it's really nice that they finally give them some story. Like, Ren is super quiet and super not chill about everything, but solemn, and there's a reason why. Family attacked by Grimm, and Nora is like the only friend he has left, and they joined Beacon together, so they finally dig into that storyline a little bit. They give Nora something more to chew on as a character, other than, I'm the happy lady, and I throw thunder everywhere, and I beat people with a stick. So it's nice that they give them that. And Crow starts giving them information about Salem and the Maidens and why they're going to Mistral and what this all means. He doesn't know everything, and that's why Raven is kind of in the backdrop, like trying to tell him not to do anything and try to keep him away from it. But he is Crow. He's not going to run away from a thing. So that's Team Ranger. They deal with getting to Haven Academy and Mistral on their own. You've got Weiss dealing with the family situation. As I've mentioned, you just a broken down home that has this veneer of pomp and circumstance because they own everything in Atlas, but Ironwood knows that they're a family full of shit. The company name is nothing, except it's a monolith. It's basically everything and nothing, because it's just slave labor and, you know, cutting costs and budget costs and whatever. So Weiss is caught in the middle of, like, believing she's the heiress of everything, only to be told, nope, she gets her hand slapped and, you know, grounded, pretty much. So her whole thing is she has to learn how to summon and learn how to, get stronger. So she spends the entire season like fighting against her family name and learning what Winter already knows how to do, and that's summon heavy, strong shit. So that's her story arc. We've got Blake going home to Menagerie, which I mentioned the Faunus before. In this season, it's finally kind of given weight. There was a war in Remnant about 100 years ago, and Faunus were used as slaves and not treated the best. So there's that race relations kind of thing again. And Blake and Son go to Menagerie, which is this kind of offshoot island. Think of like an Australia or a New Zealand thing. They're far, far the fuck away. And they meet Blake's family, but the White Fang are there trying to stir up shit. And Blake's friend Ilya's caught in the middle, and, it's kind of a subterfuge kind of thing. So you have this family dynamic and storyline that gets expressed over the next couple of seasons and manifests in Volume 5. And Blake starts to learn what she wants to be, and I think kind of break out of her shell a little bit, because Sun is there kind of forcing the issue. And as a friend, Yang, she spends the entire season training to get past this like PTSD she suffered. She doesn't have RWBY anymore. She doesn't have Blake anymore. She knows Weiss just got stolen from her by her father, and Yang is just stuck in a bed. She has one arm. She doesn't have like any interest in fighting again because she came up against somebody in Adam Torres who just wrecked her face. But Ty is supportive and gives her a weapon. He basically gets someone from Atlas to make a new gauntlet arm and this prosthetic arm that, think of like Mercury's prosthetic legs and shit. Same idea. Just this awesome prosthetic arm that will allow her to do things like she did, but she has to kind of reconcile, does she want to fight again? And it takes her the entire season to kind of get that mojo back. But when Yang gets her mojo back, she starts to be yet again another really integral character, and I think she actually shines quite a bit. I think Blake and Yang honestly shine in volumes 4 and 5 because they're the ones that, not saying they didn't have a backdrop, I just think didn't like explore their backstories enough. Weiss, it's pretty obvious, the broken home, despite the pomp and circumstance, it's obvious. And RWBY is RWBY. RWBY's not going to change for anybody. She's going to be in earnest, she's going to fight, she's going to do what she does, and it's not going to change. But Blake and Yang finally get like the huge centerpiece moments that I think is what they were building towards. And now that Yang's mom is into the occasion, holy shit. So the setup for Volume 5 is Volume 4. And what I really enjoy is Mistral being this crazy, like, Asian-inspired world. They have a lot of, like, Chinese and Japanese early century thatched roof looking places. It's very like rustic Asian design. Menagerie is the same way, though it's more of its own country. It's not the typical Western and European design philosophy. They add in a lot of the Asian style backdrops, and I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. It is a huge benefit and a huge boon for this kind of region to differentiate itself from Beacon. And whether it's the main towns of Mistral and whatnot, or just some side stories, it's a lot of forests and a lot of like just Asian inspired stuff. So any like anime stuff, I'm on board with that. They went full bore with that kind of design philosophy. Speaking of designs, the characters themselves get new character designs too, and this has become a trend. Like every 3 seasons or so, they would have new character designs. RWBY goes away from just straight black and red to kind of a black and red skirt design, but she's got a little more like muted grays and greens into her outfits. Her cape is kind of tattered and torn, so you see what she's been through. Weiss has like this darker gray skirt. Not my favorite design personally. I think Weiss should honestly be a lot flashier, and I liked her original Volume 1 design. The almost white grayish, like very bright. This is like very muted gray, and it's fine, but it's not great. Blake gets a complete redesign. She goes from the black and white design to this like sort of blue and a white shirt kind of thing. It's like a complete design philosophy change. And it's striking. It is, because you do those original designs, and then you just go, now we're gonna do a whole different thing, and it's gonna look totally different. Yang kind of gets the same idea. She gets the same color scheme she had before, but now she has like longer pants instead of a short skirt. She doesn't have like the ruffle thing. She just has like a jacket, this like brownish orangish jacket with a lot of yellow flares into it. So all the characters get like new designs every few years, and they make a big deal out of it in the intros too. They I remember in Volume 7 they like reveal their new outfits as part of the intro. It's just like, that's so fucking cool. So every so often you just change it up a little bit and add something new, and it's exemplified in the CG. They took a massive step forward in Volumes 4 and 5, and they do again in Seasons 6 and 7 and whatnot. But no longer is it like that old school, like Volume 1, like they're black, there's just black NPCs everywhere. There's like everybody floating across the ground. No, they went full bore in revamping everything from a design perspective. And it really shows that they made some great strides in Volume 4. And I think what caps off Volume 4 for me is the song Let's Just Live, where it's a very like distressing song. It's hopeful, but it's also like you think everything was a fairy tale and they were just pretending. Stuff like that, where they don't even show it. I think the best part of it is actually stuff they don't even show in the intro, because the intro is only like a minute long or so, and you really need to hear the entire thing. They have a bit where they reference Pyrrha's death in the middle of the song, and it gets this like awesome bombastic like yelling and just not screaming but just yelling, and just this bombastic moment in the middle that really sells it. And I think it's my favorite song, despite the fact that it's not that super fast driving song. It's still good for me, and it really sells that everybody's been split apart. Everybody's trying to make the best of a bad situation, and Volume 4 is about resetting everybody's motivations and resetting the stakes of what's going on. As we get into Volume 5, most of the backdrop. Volume 5 is just the culmination of Volume 4. So you get all of everything going on, and there's really not too many characters left to introduce. The only like new character is Vernal, which I talked about before, and then Leonardo Lionheart, the leader of Haven Academy. So Damon Mills voices him, and he is like Raven, except way more cowardly, if you can believe that. Like, Raven can fight for herself, and she just chooses to run away most of the time. Lionheart's just a wuss. He gets just destroyed, but he has a reason for that. Like, even though he has a weapon that's like a dust disc, think of Weiss's sword kind of thing, but in a disc weapon on his hand. He has been infiltrated by Salem and Arthur, and he knows he's got the fear of God in everything, and he's trying to give Crow information about Haven Academy and all this stuff because they finally made it. But there's just something wrong, and he knows it because Salem is there and always watching him, and she's got that orb of doom, that octopus orb of doom just hanging over him like a sword of Damocles, and he's just a complete mind fuck. So everything that goes wrong in Haven is his fault because Salem has infiltrated everything. And it's in Volume 5 where you start learning about Haven Academy versus Beacon. You start getting Hazel's involvement more. He starts to go around with Adam Torres, and they're trying to infiltrate Haven Academy, and Adam is trying to use his subordinates in Menagerie to fuck up Menagerie too. So there's so many different plot points that Salem is going after. So they're trying to do so many other things with the White Fang and Menagerie, but Hazel's and Haven with Adam, and they're also fucking shit up in the background. They're starting coups and they're starting wars and things. The other big story is Yang and Weiss kind of make it to each other at Raven's camp. So Raven's camp is in the woods of Mistral somewhere, but Yang kind of drives herself, towards Raven because she's looking for her. Turns out Weiss got there first and was kidnapped, and she boarded she was able to find a way out of her mansion with Klein's help and get into the Mistral camp, but they just keep her locked up until Yang just shows up and calls her mom's bullshit, and Raven takes them to Mistral to figure out shit for themselves because Raven's trying to coerce them and say, no, you do not want this. You do not want to fight Salem. I keep telling you, stop it. So they don't listen, and they just say, okay, we'll go to Mistral. Blake is dealing with the White Fang situation, and that turns violent. And that's where Gira gets to show off his big, burly, I'm going to kick the ass of everybody involved. You got Ilya fighting, all this stuff. So it is the culmination of all of this stuff, but you're still getting a lot of backstory. And a lot of it has to do with the Yang storyline and Raven, but you're also getting backstory from Ozpin because Team Ranger and Crow are already there along with Oscar, and Ozpin and Oscar kind of work together to help train each other and then train Ruby and Nora and Ren and all that stuff. Jean finally gets his semblance, which is known as amplification. There's this gigantic fucking battle over what is known as the Summer Relic. It's not shown exactly what it is or why it is. That's going to be later, but apparently these relics are so goddamn important that Salem has sent Cinder and Hazel and everybody to find them and to kill anybody who gets in their way. So the relics are in the schools. The Beacon one, they at least mentioned the Beacon one because Ruby fucked everything up with her crazy laser eyes of doom thing from Volume 3. The Beacon relic has been secure, and Cinder didn't find it. But there's this gigantic fight over the relic in Leonardo's campus, and it takes 3 episodes to go over, but everybody starts to kind of get together and do the thing, including Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury. They kind of coerce Raven into helping on their side, but then it becomes this crazy, I'm going to backstab you, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do all this stuff, and Cinder's trying to absorb the power of the Spring Maiden. It turns out that Raven was the Spring Maiden all along, and they get this amazing fucking boss fight with this crazy theme, and near the end of the season where Cinder is almost able to get Raven, but through sheer willpower and cunning, Raven was able to stop her. And what I like is that because Salem exists, Cinder's in this she doesn't have the power or the will to stop Salem. But again, you still have to focus on Cinder as a character, but I like it whenever Cinder gets her comeuppance because of what she did to Pyrrha. And now this amazing thing. You can't redeem Cinder after what she did. And I like seeing Salem basically smack her hand and say, I own you. You suck. And I will end you if you don't do what I say. So you have this push-pull of Cinder being this just maniacal, devious snake lady kind of vibe, trying to get power, but then you realize that Salem is the one with all the power anyway, and she's just using her. But it's still like, I'm not on Cinder's side. I'm not on her side at all. I don't care. I like seeing her get her ass kicked. So seeing Raven just ruffle stomp her near the end was great. So Raven opens the door to the vault where the spring relic is, only for Yang to take it. Because Raven didn't want it. She was just there to get out of the situation, to do what she ended up doing, which was get rid of Cinder anyway. But Yang says, I will take this burden because you don't want it. And despite Raven continually just telling her daughter, no, I'm not going to let you, she just relents and runs away. So Volume 5 doesn't end on as much of a dour note as 3 did. But at the same time, you start seeing that what Salem is after, why the other people are trying to fight so hard to do the thing, or in Raven's case, run away from it all, which makes perfect sense. Salem is nigh unstoppable and has enough crazy villains at her beck and call that are almost as powerful as she is. I can understand Raven not wanting to get involved in this shit, but knowing that she has the power of the Spring Maiden also says to me, she's going to be a threat one way or another. The question is, when is that going to manifest again? Or is it going to manifest again? I haven't seen Raven again in the other seasons since. So that's where Volume 4 and Volume 5 coalesce, is the attack on Haven sort of worked, but sort of didn't work because Salem didn't get the relic. Adam Taurus and all this stuff gets fought off in Menagerie because Blake and all of them stopped them from doing so. So this big bombastic fight concludes. Salem's group is running off, not out of being scared, but just being overwhelmed by the sheer numbers. And Salem is left bearing the brunt and taking it out on people like Leonardo and whatever the fuck she wants. Salem has been stopped for now, but Ozpin knows that they need to go to Atlas and to recover the Winter Relic as soon as goddamn possible. So that is what season 6 through 8 end up doing, is the Atlas arc. So we're going to be reintroduced to James Ironwood and Winter Schnee and Penny and a whole host of new people, but we have a whole host of people looking for these relics, and Volume 5 ends on this hopeful and yet uncertain note of where things are gonna go. I think RWBY hit its stride around here. They gave the characters something new, something stronger to sink their teeth into as characters and give them motivation as to why they want to fight Salem or avoid Salem at all costs. Why RWBY would want to deal with this, why Yang would want to deal with this after having her arm chopped off, why Blake has suddenly become more of a team player, why Weiss is now not the heiress that she used to be and is more resolved to everything else, and then everybody else involved. They give everybody else even more depth, and that's what those mid-seasons do. They add depth, and it adds to their journey to Atlas and to Mantle to find these relics and stop Salem. What I will say is that everything starts to coalesce around season 6, and all of the mysteries and all of the crazy stuff will start to be answered in the next episode. But for now, I will take Volume 4 and 5 as a sign that RWBY was off and running on all cylinders, and I do think they planned this stuff out all the way back when. A lot of the stuff that they were prepping comes to fruition and starts to build upon each other, and it just seems like it's can't miss. So if you haven't gone and seen seasons 1 through 3, I would definitely get to those. If you haven't seen volumes 4 or 5, definitely get to those. This is one of those shows that you do kind of need to go from the beginning, or even at least from seasons 2 and 3, much less season 1. But everything is building. everything is working, and it just keeps on working. But we'll call that here for today. But next time, we're going to do Mega Man X, and we're going to do seasons 6 through 8 of RWBY in a couple of weeks. And then after that, I've decided to delve into Dragon Quest for the first time on these podcasts. And I chose to do Dragon Quest VIII, The Journey of the Cursed King. And Dragon Quest VIII is one of those where I'm like, this is amazing. Why have I not played Dragon Quest before? Why have I not gotten into this? Dragon Quest VIII was my first introduction into Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest, that sort of thing. And I've been a fan ever since. And it really shows. Even though back in the PS2 era, Dragon Quest was still, we have our staples, we have our traditions, we are going to keep them. We do not change for you. Deal with it. Even back then, they had their traditions and they stuck to them. The PS2 game is one of the best ones. I don't know if it is the best. I think 5 and 11 might be better, but I will revel in experiencing Dragon Quest VIII again and talking about it. So we've got a full host of things to talk about going forward. I'm definitely happy that I'm getting things in full swing and in full gear with these podcasts, but I want to know what you guys think. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Please let me know what I could do to improve, and or do you want me to just keep staying the course and working at this? I'm more than happy to get some constructive criticism for these projects that I'm doing. But that'll do it for me today. Citizen Strife, signing off.